Buongiorno a tutti and welcome to this episode of The Banker's Bookshelf. The Banker's Bookshelf is our opportunity to learn from authors and researchers of the most interesting books and papers who challenge our thinking about the banking industry and its fintech future. My name is Paolo Sironi, and today I'm pleased to have with me Leda Glyptis. Leda, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Leda, you're one of the most respected voices in fintech. You're a former banker, you're a trailblazer, and I adore your blog and your writing. You're truly talented. So it's a pleasure and an honor to have you here at the Banker's Bookshelf. Now, I believe you don't need introduction, but for people who never encountered Leda, she's not just a storyteller. That would be a diminutive. She's a reality teller. That means she basically has the talent to tell us the truth, the important things that sometimes scare bankers or entrepreneurs in ways that are truly inspiring. So that's why I believe today's conversation is important. And as this is the first episode of 2026, we could not start the year without this wonderful bang. So welcome to the show, truly.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's amazing to hear this kind of praise, particularly coming from you. So I really appreciate that. As you say, I've made a career out of pointing out the thing that we're probably all thinking, but nobody was saying. And it has been powerful. It has been powerful because it creates community, but also very often you find that we're not all thinking it. There are knowledge gaps, there are interpretation gaps, there are perspectives that are very different. So yes, I've spent 20 years doing exactly what you described, pointing things out and going, has everyone seen this?
Well, in a respectful and extremely valuable way. And I believe you always come through very authentic in your speaking and in your writing. So I've read your books, and the last one, which is the one we want to discuss today, is this one. I'm showing it for the folks who are watching on YouTube and not just listening on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube Music. Beyond Resilience, Patterns of Success in Fintech and Digital Transformation is a very interesting book filled of stories, stories of those who made it to succeed or to fail. And they're both good stories because there's always something to learn. And I believe that when you read it, you sense a couple of things. First of all, the depth of Leda's relationships that allowed her to understand the industry on both sides of the equation, the banks and the fintech, with extreme clarity, but also the richness of everything which has been going on in the last few years in the innovation space. And she brings to the surface her perspective as well as the point of view of a lot of the makers. So this book is filled with quotes. And I think that what I want to do today is the following. I selected a few quotes of people that contributed to Leda's thinking, and I want to bring some of these to the surface and start our commentary this way in a way that we can all learn a bit more about what's inside this book. And of course, this is my first book recommendation of 2026, Beyond Resilience, Patterns of Success in Fintech and Digital Transformation. So I'm sure that you will all want to go buy it and read it by yourself. So Leda, let's start. What is your elevator speech? Why should people read this book?
My elevator speech is the reason why I wrote it. As you say, I've been writing and speaking a lot from the point of view of a practitioner who's mostly very frustrated. So most of my work and thinking and speaking in my first book was all around failures, all the reasons why digital transformation fails, all the reasons why digital ventures fail. And I had a moment where I was like, well, actually, okay, we mostly fail, but not fully. And it's been 20 years of digital journeys, and there are enough success stories that we can ask the question, is there a pattern to success? We know there's a pattern to failure, and we keep falling for the same patterns. That's a story for another time. But even though success stories are not as frequent as failure stories, they're frequent enough for us to say, do they have things in common? Can we learn something that can drive our behaviors differently? And the answer that I get from all the stories in the book is, yes, there is absolutely a pattern, and it involves doing a lot of hard things consistently and over a long time. So there's no silver bullet, but there are some incredibly insightful stories that are actionable. They're not just these one-off stories of success. That was a long elevator ride, but I think that's the last thing I want to leave with people, that if you pick up this book, some stories will make you go, oh, wow, that person got lucky or unlucky. But quite a lot of the stories, in fact, the majority of the stories, are immediately actionable should you choose to action them.
Well, Leda, in my small career, I've been a banker myself. I built a small company, Fintech, called Capitex in Germany, and now I work for IBM. So I reinvented myself a few times. My Fintech was not a startup in that sense. It was more a scale up. So my ambition was not to build and sell, if you like, or I never thought of being super big or unicorn. I started doing something that I wanted to do, and that made me happy, and that worked out for me, though that was sold, it's not there anymore in the market. But a lot of people look at just the flashing stories of the big unicorns. So there is this quote that I've been reading that drew my attention by Alex Johnson. Researchers have discovered that you're more likely to go bankrupt if someone in your neighborhood wins the lottery. Over the last 3 years, a bunch of folks in fintech won the lottery, and now we're all going bankrupt. Found it very funny and revealing. So,
Yeah.
what can we say about this?
It's funny because it's true. It's actually taken from one of Alex's articles, and I messaged him and said, "Look, I'm using this verbatim. Obviously, I'm attributing, I'm quoting. It's well written, it's funny, but it's also true, and it really captures the fact that there was a moment of collective drunkenness, I think, in the industry, where we all drank our own Kool-Aid, right? We all believed a narrative of entrepreneurship and greatness, and there was a moment, I don't know if you remember it, it's quite a few years back now, where people were quitting their jobs right, left, and center. There was an immense amount of capital being pumped into fintech by mostly VCs, but also corporate venture capital. People were finding partnerships a little easier to come by than normal. The regulators were not necessarily making things easier, but they were leaning in, having more dialogue. And there was a moment where the narrative that, you know, you should move fast and break things, and you should go big and not believe the naysayers and find a way. We all, as an industry and beyond, believed it. I also quote from the Theranos story in that same chapter in the book, because the reality is we allowed some of that to go too far. We pumped money into ideas that were never going to work because they don't have the right target addressable market sizing, or they don't have the right cost base, or they just don't have customers who are willing to pay for this solution, or as Theranos proved, that are just scientifically implausible. And we allowed that to go on for a very long time. And then there was a moment when Alex wrote that piece that you quote from, where the emperor was found to be naked in a couple of situations. You know, we had the SVB failure that turned out to be a risk modeling failure more than anything else. There were a series of failures that were quite spectacular, and everyone went, oh my God, is this whole thing a bubble?
Well, definitely there are success stories, right? And it's not that I want to discount them, but in my work life, every year I meet hundreds of bankers, between CEOs and CIOs and other execs everywhere in the world, and most of the guys look for the most prominent stories as a source for inspiration. And I like to tell them that although it's relevant to know what JP Morgan does, for example, JP Morgan is a true liar among the big banks. They have 10% less efficiency ratio than the other big banks, which is not easy for the incumbent. Or they want to know what Nubank does. I love Nubank a bit more than Revolut, if I can say. Their business model is pretty clean, but nowhere in a market you can have 200 million customers available to you, and they got 130 million on their platform, and being capable of growing that way. So you also need to understand where you are in. So those can give inspiration, but not necessarily are a model to copy. And what we saw is that the main narrative in the fintech world was grow, grow,
Yeah.
grow.
Yes.
And then Guven brings this point of view to the surface in page 175 of Beyond Resilience, where he says, it's easy to lose faith in fintech when you look at the boom and bust, but if you focus on product and focus on making money rather than growth at all cost, you end up with a different model and it works. So how can we fix this lunacy, like a growth at all costs, instead of looking at the basics of the economics? Because I see the many fintech, but also many banks, when they try to apply innovation, they don't have a clear idea about their economic model and how really to make money. Sometimes you can know exactly at the very beginning, but you need to have a good grasp about what it takes to become profitable and economically sustainable.
That's 100% right. And in fact, as you saw, Dennis talks about his own journey working with Guarantee Bank in Turkey, with iGuarantee, where when they launched their first digital offering, it was all about the innovation index. It was all about creative, cool, differentiating capabilities. Nobody had really thought about how they were going to make money. And of course, that doesn't come to you magically. But we often believe that innovation would unlock value in a magical way. And Silicon Valley Capital is largely to blame for that, because, of course, for them, you grow, exit at a multiple, and then operationalizing becomes the PE house's problem, or whoever bought you. What then he says, reflecting on what he learned from iGuarantee and how he applied it to Mox, because, of course, he was the founding CEO of Mox in Hong Kong, for those who don't know him, is that you can't bring innovation into the mix and believe it will be its own answer. So what he did differently with Mox is that he had a clear idea of how he would make money from day zero. So his view is, I'm a bank. The only way I can make money is lending. So I need to lend quickly. So my entire business model and how I deploy innovative solutions have to be about how I get to a place where I can lend with all the appropriate controls, cheaply for the bank and easily for the customers. So UX and operating leverage become solutions and levers for the business model, which is, I need to go out there and lend. And if you take a step back, the reality is the vast majority of fintechs that grew to very, very large numbers did so with VC capital. But we haven't seen incredible exits. We've seen amazing stories of growth, and we've seen amazing exits for CEOs, but those sustainable businesses are few and far between, right? And the ones that have succeeded are the ones that had a clear sense of the problem they're solving, a clear sense of where they would make money, and a clear sense of the levers they had to pull. So I have the Wise story in the book. And part of what they talk about from day zero is operating cost. You don't have a lot of startups talking about operating costs because VCs don't often ask about operating cost. But it holds the key to how you make money.
Yes, it's really important. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a very prominent investor, the head of investment of one of the top VC funds in the US back then in 2016, just not mention the person for confidentiality. But he asked me why he was not selling that much of his portfolio, although he had wonderful fintech startups in his hands, and he was looking at banks primarily as acquirers. And I said, don't be confused. Banks might make money, but they don't have capital. So you got to understand that. So the exit strategy was not well placed as an opinion. And there was the source of a lot of misunderstandings in fintech in the way they were building their solutions. So definitely they had to think in terms of being a scale up more than a startup. And it's a different mindset. And many just got trapped into the narrative of the fintech per se or the startup story. And to do so, I think it remains a very adaptable mindset. Like, first of all, you said it right when you talked about the economic model, the protect expenses. Innovation is a mindset, is not a business model. Technology is a mean, is not a business model. A business model is something else. And here and there in the book, all of this comes to the surface with very catchy examples. And I like to go to another quote that got my attention. And it got my attention because I remember I was talking to the CEO and founder of Betterment, one of the largest robo advisors in the US, in 2017. And the question from John was why we're not growing as much as we were growing before. So we got to the conversation where I invited him to see the gap between their narrative and their real client. So they were all bragging about democratization, inclusiveness in terms of financial opportunities and so on and so forth. But their primary customer was a 50 years old almost guy, 50,000 almost money invested in a portfolio, 401k type of decision-making process or retirement. And then I invited them to see the fact that maybe not all of the customers out there would be totally digitally inclined. A, because they might not be. B, because maybe it was too early. So I said you need to be capable of contradict your narrative. So don't just think about digital only. Your first customers are not necessarily representative of the real client out there. And then they move into, not just because I said that, I think they were doing that type of analysis into an hybrid model, and they started growing again very, very large. Now, Jasper Martin says, dare to pivot on your original idea, and that's a super, super, super important sentence and concept to you, Leda.
It is difficult, and you're right. It's a banner we should have in the space. Actually, banks, scale up, startups, you need to dare to pivot on your original idea, because your original idea may be wrong. And there's one story in the book of a business that had to pivot because the thing they were trying to solve for wasn't a problem for the market. And the CEO, who had a successful exit afterwards, and he could reflect back, he said, I was very passionate about solving for this information and power asymmetry in the market, but the people I was trying to solve it for were benefiting from it. So actually, I was right in my solution, but I was wrong that it was a problem. And the point Jasper is making is it might not be as stark as that, but your market will keep evolving. You may have some nuances that are wrong. You need to constantly challenge yourself and pivot when you find that either the thing you're solving for is not a problem, or it's not a problem for a big enough size of the market, or it's a problem, but the market is not willing to pay what you need them to pay. And I think that's the other thing, right? We build these stories about target addressable markets, but the reality is markets shift, particularly consumer markets. Their needs, their preferences change, and things that they would like to have, they might not want to pay for. So these validation points mean that you will constantly need to challenge yourself, and you might have to pivot because you're too early, as you said, or because you're wrong.
Yes, or like a clear example is Facebook, by the way. I don't know if you ever watched the first pitches of Mike Zuckerberg about what Facebook was meant to be. I remember there was an interview, was it 60 Minutes or another US program? And it was talking about Facebook in a very funny way, like we're going to help people share pictures of their girlfriends. And he goes, oh, we have this wonderful idea, and now you can let your friends know how good you were in your exams. Now, who cares about sharing the results of your exams like college, right? But that was his elevator pitch. But I guess that the point is that he was flexible enough to understand that people were using the solution in different ways, and he followed somehow the tide, right? But that was not the way he was conceiving his business. So you need to be ready to pivot and change your mind, especially when you realize that, yes, you get something, it's not a perfect fit, but hey, let's be inspired about how people are now thinking and trying to use that. So create feedback loops, talk to clients, be on your side, be ready to contradict yourself. Your bold idea may not be bold enough, but next to one that is even better. And on top of this, we said, okay, you have the mindset of the entrepreneur. That's important. You have the need of inspiring yourself without getting trapped into a narrative that is not for you. But then you also need to understand the technology. And this is a problem for both banks and fintech. Clearly, some fintechs are more prominent in the way they use technology, sometimes too ambitious. Banks know how to use technology, but not necessarily they see the full picture. Because so much ingrained into doing this and that, the head is down, so difficult to see the full landscape. And there is this quote by Anthony Jenkins, which I believe is relevant. What he says in the book is, Zoom and Microsoft Teams have enabled us to work remotely, but actually, what really enabled remote work was high-speed broadband. When thinking about tech change, you need to think about tech stacks on top of each other. You need to understand the fundamental technology you are relying on and the relationships of dependency. Leda, clear example. So many banks work with AI, not many banks work with data. You can't do AI without data.
Oh God, yes, so true. I actually worked with a bank who was trying to create something sexy around their PSD2 strategy. Remember back in the day,
Oh, making PSD2 sexy is quite
making
challenging.
PSD2. And I remember working with them on this and realizing very early on that the divisions that we had at the table and the budget we had for compliance and some creativity around it did not stretch to data. And we were being tasked with creating an API strategy and PSD2 compliance without any budget or approvals for data governance. So, what is happening now with AI is that on steroids. And I think the point Anthony is making works on two levels. One is, as entrepreneurs, do you sanity check the ecosystem you're trying to plug into? I was speaking to a payments provider in South Africa who was talking about how they create consumer solutions that they can't import solutions from more mature economies because of the capabilities of people's phones of the particular community that they're trying to serve. And I'm sitting there, London bred technologist, going, oh God, yeah, I have never designed for that. So there is the realities of where are you operating? What is the regulatory framework of the markets you're selling into? Are they cloud first? Are they API first? So lean into the paradigm, but also it says you can't pick and choose. You can't do AI without all the hygiene underneath it. You can't take an AI solution and balance it precariously on a system from the 50s that has batch jobs running and reconciles at the end of the day and think, I've done it. So there's two conversations in parallel. Is your solution too far, too fast, to quote what you were saying earlier, for the market you're trying to sell it into? And is whatever you're trying to do in sync with all the bits that it needs to plug into? The answer is very often no. We're seeing very often, particularly startups who are ahead of the curve for a particular market. And that means they mostly run out of steam. But we also see more established organizations that try to do the new thing by balancing it on top of everything else. And as you say, we're seeing so many entities who have an AI strategy without having a data strategy, who don't have the discipline, who don't have the governance, who don't have the understanding of what their data needs to look like for them to be able to trust the results.
And also, it's important to have an understanding of all the dependencies in the technology space, because not everything is granted or autonomous in terms of resilience. You need to understand the play that everyone plays, okay, and how exposed you are to a disruption, as the architecture in the end may be very complex. Give you an example. A lot of fintech discount the difficulty to access their market. So when I built my scale up, I thought of building the pipeline before building the product, because I thought that I was a banker, very diligent in doing their counterparty risk. So when I go through procurement in a small company, they will not look at me favorably because I take too big of a risk to take solutions in a B2B market from somebody who is not proven yet. So you need to make sure that you have a strategy to access the pipeline even before you have the product, if you like. But at the same time, bankers make another mistake. These days, they are all engaging with very few, very concentrated number of AI model providers, which have a business model and economic model that is not necessarily economically sustainable. So there's a big debate these days about the fate of OpenAI, the fact they're burning cash at an excessive amount. So would they be able to price their investments or not. And this is an important element, because if you're a company you rely upon somebody else, which is maybe big, but highly concentrated in the risk of failure through their economic model, you have a problem, right? And Houston, I believe we do have a problem. Arvind Krishna, the CEO of IBM, was recently commenting upon the complexities of paying back those structural investments in the generative AI solutions that are in the market,
Yeah.
because people make parallels, like you are investing in infrastructure, we're not, because data centers, they amortize every 5 years because you need to renew the investment in the CPUs. It's not about building railroads. They will be there for 100 years. So many misunderstand the economic model. Also, the big companies, maybe they have a secret we don't know. So now there is a wonderful quote. Maybe they don't, but maybe let's hope they do. So Kelvin Tan reminds us this, page 137 of Beyond Resilience. To get pricing right, you need to make hypotheses, benchmark, and validate. Once you determine the right pricing, you work backwards to establish cost. If you overestimate market appetite, you need to change your cost structure to protect margin. You do not start with your cost. Now, I would invite Sam Altman to read your book and start from page 137. What else can you tell us about this? Sam, I'm sure you're listening to the Banker's Bookshelf. This book is for you.
You better be listening. So there's so much in what you said, and there's so much in Kelvin's quote. I think what you said is a very good alarm bell for all of our banker friends right now. Because as you say, first of all, we have concentration risk because every organization is using the same 3 providers right now. So there's no differentiation, there's no capability building, there's a bit of FOMO implementation. We're all a little bit cautious and nervous in how we implement, so we don't do anything particularly exciting. So the ROI is dead. And the reality is people will look at this in a couple of months as they're doing their budgets for next year and go, this isn't working. So reading Kelvin's words is very, very important right now, because the reality is when we are creating new capabilities, we make a whole host of assumptions about what it needs, what the market can pay for it. But the reality is when we're building something new, it's very hard to benchmark it. And pricing is something that most startups get wrong. And in fact, there are a couple of stories in the book of companies that died because they got their pricing wrong. And they only discovered that their market was willing to pay a lot more than they had charged when it was too late to turn their fate around. And what Kelvin says is, don't guess. Take advice, benchmark, and go out into the market and validate when there is still time to do something about it. And I think that's the most valuable thing to take away from what Kelvin is saying, because he says you need to go out there and validate your assumptions and be willing to flex on your operating cost if you find that the market can't sustain your price point, to change your target strategy in terms of your addressable market, your geography, your segment. You need to go out there and validate and then be willing to act on the feedback. And that's the hardest thing, because invariably, I've worked with a lot of startups that are way too expensive for their market. So they go, right, we will only sell to tier 1 banks for enterprise contracts. And it's like, right, I'm glad you solved it. Rather than saying, okay, the people we thought we're building for don't have this problem or don't want to pay this much. What can I do to make it appealing to the people who are willing to pay, or to make it cheaper? And Kelvin's point is, go out, validate, and then come back and adjust. And that's the hardest part. Can you and will you adjust your price and your operating cost to protect your margin? You should, but many don't.
Leda, thanks for the opportunity you gave us to provide some insights to our audience, including Sam Altman of ChatGPT. And this is the first episode of 2026, so I'm super glad that Beyond Resilience is my first book recommendation for this year. I invite everyone to follow Leda Glyptis, whatever is the social media platform you use. I typically saw her commentaries on LinkedIn. Go on Amazon, get this book, Patterns of Success in Fintech and Digital Transformation. That is really my recommendation for this January. Leda, thanks for being on the Bank's Bookshelf.
Thank you for having me.
And everybody stay tuned, because more conversations are coming with book authors and researchers of the most interesting books and papers that shape the banking present and its fintech future. If you want to receive a polite notification about our new episodes, you can just subscribe to the Banker's Bookshelf on your preferred streaming platforms. We are big on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, and also YouTube. Arrivederci tutti and enjoy the jingle.